She thought giving up one child would save them all. But some secrets are destined to find their way home. 6 years after separating her newborn twins, fate reunites them in the most unexpected place, while the man she never stopped loving discovers he has been robbed of fatherhood. As buried truths begin to surface, two rival mafia families will face a choice between revenge and the love that could finally end their war. You are listening to a story exclusively narrated on the Dark Romance Stories channel. Relax and step into a world where love, betrayal, hidden identities, and unforgettable family secrets collide. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment to support us. This content is the exclusive property of Dark Romance Stories. Please do not copy, reproduce, or re-upload it in any form. The Voluto Club did not open its doors to the ordinary. It opened them to the dangerous, the beautiful, and the damned. And tonight, it opened them for Damiano Rossi. He arrived the way weather arrives, without asking permission. The bass swallowed the room whole, gold light dripping down black marble, and every head turned the moment his shoes touched the floor. Men who commanded armies straightened their spines. Women who had learned long ago to be unimpressed forgot the lesson entirely. Damiano did not notice any of them. He never did. That was the first thing people learned about him, and the last thing they forgot. The man looked at a room full of worshippers and found nothing worth his eyes. "Signor Rossi." The manager materialized, sweat gleaming on his temples despite the cold air. "Your table, I know where my table is." Damiano didn't stop walking. His voice was low, unhurried, the kind of calm that came from never once in his life being told no. "Bring me nothing. I won't be staying." He climbed to the mezzanine, to the private booth that overlooked the whole gilded animal of the club, and he sat with the stillness of a man who owned not only the building, but the air inside it. Because he did. He had bought the Voluto 18 months ago, quietly, through 4 shell companies, for exactly one reason. She used to sing here. Aurora Vitale. The name still moved through him like a blade drawn slow. 6 years since he'd last touched her. 6 years since the single night that had rewritten the whole architecture of who he was. And then, in the morning, nothing. A cold bed, a window left open, a woman who had climbed down a fire escape rather than face him in daylight. He had let her go. That was the part no one would ever believe of Damiano Rossi, that he had let something go. He'd told himself it was mercy. Her father was Salvatore Vitale, capo of the family that had spent 3 generations trying to bury the Rossis. And Damiano had reasoned, in the icy way he reasoned everything, that loving her was a war he could not afford. So he had let the wound close over, married his ambition instead, built an empire of concrete and blood and clean laundered money until the name Rossi meant not a mafia family, but a skyline. And then, 4 days ago, a man he paid to find things had laid a photograph on his desk. A child. A boy, perhaps 6 years old, dark-haired, dark-eyed, laughing at something outside the frame. And beside the boy, holding his hand, a woman Damiano would have recognized in absolute darkness by the weight of her shadow alone. Aurora. "Signor Rossi." The voice belonged to Enzo, his second, his oldest friend, the only man alive permitted to sit without being asked. Enzo slid into the booth, his scarred face grim in the gold light. You shouldn't have come here yourself. If the Vitales, let them come. Damiano turned the photograph over in his fingers. He'd carried it 4 days now. It was already soft at the corners. The boy. How old? Damiano, how old? Enzo exhaled. Turns 6 this autumn, according to the school records. Matteo Vitale, enrolled under her name, not the father's. There is no father listed. Anywhere. Something behind Damiano's ribs went very still and very cold. He was good at that stillness. He had built a life on it. But under it, tonight, something ancient and violent was beginning to turn over in its sleep. No father listed, he repeated. None. Damiano looked down at the boy's face in the photograph, at the shape of the jaw, at the exact dark of the eyes, his own eyes, the eyes his mother had wept over, the eyes that had made grown men confess things they'd sworn to die with. He had counted the months the moment he'd seen the photo. He had counted them 100 times since, hoping the arithmetic would forgive her, or forgive him, or make a liar of the boy's face. It never did. Enzo. His voice had dropped to almost nothing. When did she leave me? The exact date. You know I remember it. Say it. The 9th of March, 6 years ago. Damiano closed his eyes. 9 months. The arithmetic was a knife, and it went in clean. She was carrying my son, he said, when she climbed out of my window. Enzo said nothing. There was nothing to say. Around them the club roared its golden roar, oblivious, drunk, ordinary, while at the centre of it a very quiet man discovered that the earth he'd been standing on for 6 years had never been solid at all. Find her, Damiano said. Tonight. I don't care what it costs. I don't care who bleeds. Find me, Aurora Vitale. And when we do? Damiano opened his eyes, and Enzo, who had seen him order executions over breakfast, felt the hair rise on his arms. Then, Damiano said softly, she is going to explain to me exactly how a man can be robbed of 6 years of his own blood and never be told the theft occurred. He stood. He buttoned his jacket, and when he walked back down through the worshipping crowd, he no longer looked like a man who found nothing worth his eyes. He looked like a man who had finally found the only thing that mattered, and intended to take it back. 3 miles away, in a cramped apartment above a laundromat that smelled perpetually of steam and detergent, Aurora Vitale was on her knees, hunting for a small red sneaker. Matteo, I swear to God, if you hid it again to be funny, I didn't. A giggle from under the couch betrayed him instantly. It's not funny at all, Mama. It's a mystery. It's a mystery that makes us late for school every single day. She reached under the couch, found the sneaker wedged behind a forgotten action figure, and pulled both out with the triumphant sigh of a woman who had learned to celebrate very small victories. There, solved. Come here, detective. He crawled out, all elbows and dark hair, and a grin that stopped her heart every time, because it was not her grin. She knew whose grin it was. She saw it every morning, and she had learned to keep breathing anyway. 6 years old this autumn. 6 years of steam and detergent and second-hand shoes, of singing lullabies she'd once sung to sold-out rooms, of glancing over her shoulder at every dark car that idled too long on the street. 6 years of running from a name. She'd been someone else once. Aurora Vitali, the capo's only daughter, the girl with the voice that made hard men weep, dressed in silk and diamonds and expectations she'd never asked for. Her father had wanted to marry her into an alliance. Her whole life had been a chess piece polished to shine. And then, one night, at a truce dinner she should never have attended, she had looked across a room and met the eyes of Damiano Rossi. She still didn't have language for what had happened. It had not been a choice. Choices could be reasoned with. This had been gravity. He had crossed the room, this cold, beautiful enemy, and he had said, "You're the one who sings." And she had said something clever and forgotten it instantly. And 3 hours later, they were tangled in his sheets in a penthouse in the sky, and she had understood for the first and only time in her life what people meant when they said they had lost themselves. She had run before dawn, not because she didn't want him, because she wanted him so much it terrified her, and because she was a Vitale and he was a Rossi, and their two families had been feeding each other into the ground for 3 generations. To love him was to light a match in a room full of gasoline. Then she'd missed her cycle. Then the doctor had turned the ultrasound screen toward her and said gently, 2 heartbeats. You're carrying twins. 2, not 1, 2. Mama? Matteo tugged her sleeve. You did the sad face again. She blinked the memory back. I did the tired face. Grown-up faces get tired. Shoes, now. She would never tell him. That was the vow she had made in a hospital bathroom 6 years ago, sobbing so quietly no one heard. She would never tell him he had a brother somewhere. Never tell him that his mother had made an impossible arithmetic. 2 children, 1 war, and no way to hide both without her father's people finding them. Never tell him that she had held 2 newborns in a hospital, an entire state away, under a false name, and that a kind, careful lawyer had taken 1 small bundle from her arms and carried it out into a life she would never be allowed to see. She'd chosen. God forgive her, she'd chosen. A single child, a single woman, invisible. 2 children and a mother would have been a trail even her father's soldiers could follow. She'd told herself the second baby would be safe, loved, free of all of it. A family with no guns in the drawers and no blood on the name. She had told herself it was mercy. Most nights, she almost believed it. Okay. She tied Matteo's laces, kissed the crown of his head, breathed him in. Backpack. Lunch is in the front pocket. What's the rule? Don't tell anybody our old last name. Her hands went still. That's right. Why is it a secret? Because, she said, standing, reaching for her coat, keeping her voice light as spun sugar. Some games are more fun when nobody knows your real name. It's like being a superhero. He seemed to accept this, the way he accepted most of her careful lies, and she hated herself a little more, the way she did most mornings. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then some animal instinct, the same instinct that had kept them alive and unfound for 6 years, made her look. A single text. No name. He knows about the boy. Get out. Tonight. A friend you don't remember having. The sneaker she'd been holding hit the floor. For a moment, the whole world was only the roar of blood in her ears, and the small, warm weight of her son's hand slipping into hers, asking, why she'd gone so pale. He knows. After 6 years, the match had finally met the gasoline. The Belandi Academy sat behind wrought-iron gates on a leafy street where the cars cost more than the houses in Aurora's old neighbourhood. She could not afford it. She had never been able to afford it. Matteo attended on a full music scholarship that the school believed had been funded by an anonymous arts foundation. There was no foundation. There was only a numbered account that Aurora had never touched, opened by a lawyer she'd met once, 6 years ago, in a hospital corridor that smelled of antiseptic and grief. She had made only one condition when she gave up her second child. If it can ever be arranged, without anyone knowing, let them grow up near enough to breathe the same air. Not to meet, never to meet, just near. The lawyer had thought her sentimental. She had not corrected him. She could not have explained that she'd held 2 babies for one single night, and that severing them had felt like tearing her own body in half, and that the only bearable version of the horror was to imagine them one day walking under the same sky. She had never dreamed they would walk under the same roof. She had never known, because she had made herself not know, because knowing would have been unbearable. That the family who adopted her second son would enroll him 6 years later at the same elegant school where a scholarship boy named Matteo Vitale had just started 1st grade. But that morning, as Aurora hurried Matteo through the gates with her heart still hammering from the text message, she did not know any of this yet. Neither did the 2 little boys. Matteo let go of her hand at the courtyard, the way he'd started doing lately, too big for public affection. "Bye, Mama. Straight home with Signora Ricci after. Don't dawdle." "I never dawdle." "You are the world champion of dawdling." He was already gone, swallowed into the bright chaos of children. She stood a moment too long at the gate, scanning the street, the parked cars, the faces. Nothing. No idling sedans, no men in good suits pretending to read newspapers. But she had felt watched for 6 years, and she trusted the feeling more than her eyes. Get out. Tonight. Could she? Uproot him again? He'd finally made a friend, finally stopped waking with nightmares, finally started to seem like a boy instead of a fugitive's cargo. And the text could be a trap. Her father's people played games like that, frightened the prey into breaking cover. She would decide by nightfall. That was the promise she made herself as she walked away. Just get through the day. Inside, in the 1st grade cloakroom, Matteo hung up his coat and turned around and stopped. There was a boy hanging up a coat 2 hooks down. A boy Matteo had never seen before, because the boy was new, transferred that very week from a private tutor his parents had finally decided he'd outgrown. The boy looked up, and both children went absolutely still. It is difficult to describe what passes between 2 people who share a face. Matteo did not think, "That boy looks like me." He was 6. He did not have the words. What he felt was stranger and older than words, a lurch of recognition so total it was almost like fear, like looking into a mirror that moved on its own. The other boy felt it too. His name was Leo Castellano now, though it had been something else for one single night in a hospital 6 years ago. He had his mother's careful hands and his father's dark eyes, and just now those dark eyes were very wide. "You look like me." Leo said finally, because children say the true thing that adults spend their whole lives learning not to. You look like me, Matteo corrected. I was here first. We're the same, Leo said, wonder swamping the small territorial insult. Look, we're exactly the same. They stood there, 2 drops of the same blood, comparing the cowlick that sat identically on the left side of each head, the same gap where a front tooth had recently departed, the same faint scar that wasn't on the chin. And something in the universe, which had been broken for 6 years, clicked one quiet notch toward whole. I'm Matteo. I'm Leo. Do you want to be best friends? Matteo asked. Since we match? Leo considered this with enormous seriousness. Then he grinned, the exact grin, tooth gap and all, and stuck out his hand the way his father had taught him grown men do. Best friends, he agreed, since we match. Neither of them knew what they had just done. Neither of them understood that they had just begun, with 2 small handshaking hands, to pull the single thread that would unravel every careful lie their mother had spent 6 years weaving. But somewhere across the city, a man was closing in, and somewhere much closer, a woman was already too late. Damiano Rossi did not sleep the night the photograph found him, nor the night after. He did not rage either. Rage was for men who lacked control, and Damiano had built his empire on control the way other men built theirs on money. He simply sat in the dark of his penthouse, 40 floors above the city, and let the cold thing in his chest grow teeth. By the 3rd morning, Enzo had the whole picture. She's living above a laundromat in the Eastern District, Enzo said, laying pages across the glass desk in the pale dawn. Cash rent. False name. Rossi, ironically. Not for you, for the anonymity of a common word. She sings weekend nights at a piano bar for tips, tutors children in music the rest of the week. No bank account we can find, no car. She's been a ghost. A very good ghost. Damiano touched the surveillance photo of the laundromat with one finger. It takes discipline to disappear like this. She learned from the best. His mouth curved without warmth. Her father taught her to run from us. She just ran further than he intended. There's more. The boy, Matteo, attends the Bolandi Academy, music scholarship, except Enzo hesitated, and Enzo did not hesitate. The scholarship's fake. It's a private trust. I traced it as far as a shell in Liechtenstein, and then it went dark. Someone with real money and real caution is paying to keep that boy at that school. It isn't her. She doesn't have it. Damiano went still. Her father? Salvatore Vitale doesn't know she's alive. I'd stake my life on it. If the Vitales knew where she was, she'd already be dragged home and married off. This is someone else, someone hiding as carefully as she is. Damiano rose and walked to the glass wall, to the city laid out beneath him like a circuit board of light and dark. He was a man who solved things. Territories, rivals, ledgers, wars. He had never met a problem he couldn't take apart. But this one had a shape he couldn't yet see, and he did not like the feeling. Someone is protecting my son, he said slowly. And it isn't me, and it isn't her family, and it isn't her. He turned. Who else even knows he exists? Enzo had no answer. "Find out who owns that trust," Damiano said, but quietly. "If I move loud, she runs, and I have spent 6 years not chasing her, only to lose her the week I decided to stop. No." He straightened his cuffs, and the motion was a decision. "I don't chase. I arrive." Meaning? Meaning I'm going to walk into her life through the front door and make it impossible for her to run. Not with soldiers, with paperwork. His smile was a terrible, elegant thing. "The Belandi Academy has a vacant seat on its board of patrons. I'm going to buy it this morning. By this afternoon, I'll have every right in the world to visit that school whenever I please. And when Aurora Vitale next drops her son at the gate, she'll walk straight into you. She'll walk straight into me," Damiano agreed. "And there will be nowhere left to run, because I will already be inside the walls she built to hide from me." Enzo watched his oldest friend for a long moment. He had known Damiano since they were boys, splitting a stolen loaf in an alley, and he had watched him harden year by year into the cold thing the city feared. But there was something in Damiano now Enzo hadn't seen in 6 years, something molten under the ice. "You still want her," Enzo said. It wasn't a question. "After everything. After she robbed you of the boy, you still—" "Careful," Damiano said, very softly, and the word had a blade in it. Enzo raised his hands. "I'm your friend. I'm the only one who can say it. You want her, and that makes you dangerous. To yourself. A man who wants nothing can't be hurt. You've been unhurtable for 6 years, Damiano. You're about to hand a woman who already left you once the power to gut you all over again." Damiano said nothing for a long moment. Then, "She didn't just leave me, Enzo. She left me carrying our child. She looked at what we made together, and she chose to raise him alone in a room above a laundromat rather than tell me he breathed." His voice never rose. That was the terrifying part. "So no, I don't want her the way I wanted her at 29. I wanted her then like a fever. I want her now like justice." He picked up the photograph of the laughing boy and slid it into his breast pocket, over his heart, where he had carried it for 4 days. "She taught my son to hide from me," he said. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life teaching them both that hiding from me is over." He walked out into the dawn to buy a school. Aurora did not run that night. She'd meant to. She'd pulled the suitcase from under the bed and stood over it, shaking, while Matteo slept. But then she'd looked at the drawing on the fridge. Matteo and a new friend, 2 identical stick figures holding hands. Matteo and Leo, best friends, scrawled underneath. And she'd thought about tearing him out of the first happiness he'd ever had. And she'd frozen. And a colder logic had surfaced. If the text was real, if he knew, then running with a suitcase and a 6-year-old would only leave a trail. Better to move carefully. Better to find out how much he actually knew. Better, God help her, to not yet believe it was true. So she stayed 1 more day. That was her mistake. She would think about it for the rest of her life, that she had stayed 1 more day. The next morning she took Matteo to school the way she always did. The street was ordinary, the gate was ordinary. She kissed his head and watched him run to Leo. She'd met the boy now, a sweet, serious child, and she'd felt an odd pang looking at him she couldn't name and hadn't let herself examine. The two of them vanished into the courtyard, thick as thieves. She turned to go. And he was there. He was leaning against a black car at the curb, as though he had been carved there, as though the street had been built around him. 6 years had not softened Damiano Rossi. They had refined him, stripped away the last of the youth and left something leaner, colder, more absolute. The suit was matte black and fit like intention. His dark eyes found her across 30 feet of ordinary morning, and the whole world went silent, the way it had the first time. That terrible gravity reaching out and closing its fist around her sternum. She stopped breathing. He did not smile. He did not move. He simply looked at her the way a man looks at a debt. "Run," said every nerve in her body. But her feet had rooted to the pavement, and he was already unfolding from the car, already crossing the street with that unhurried predator's ease, and there was nowhere to go. Behind her the gate, and behind the gate her son, and she would not, could not lead this man toward that gate. So she stood her ground. She lifted her chin. 6 years of terror, and she lifted her chin, because she was still a vitale, and vitales did not show the animal the fear. "Damiano," she said. Her voice barely shook. "Aurora." He stopped an arm's length away. This close she could smell him, cedar and something darker. And the memory that scent unlocked was so violent she had to lock her knees. "You look well. Poverty suits you, or perhaps it's the hiding. Some women bloom under pressure." "What do you want?" "What do I want?" He repeated it softly, tasting the question, turning it over. 6 years I've thought about what I'd say to you if I ever saw you again. I had a whole speech. Cold, devastating. I rehearsed it. He tilted his head. "And now here you are, and I find I have only one thing I need to know before I decide what to do with you." "Damiano." His eyes. Damiano's voice dropped to a place that made the hair rise on her arms. "The boy who just ran through that gate. He has my mother's eyes. He has my eyes. So I'm going to ask you once, Aurora, and I want you to understand that your entire future depends on whether you lie to me." The street tilted. She gripped the iron of the gate behind her. "Is he mine?" Damiano said. She could lie. She had been lying for 6 years. She was a virtuoso of it. She opened her mouth to lie, but he was watching her with those eyes. Matteo's eyes, her son's eyes, this man's eyes, and something in her, some exhausted, buried, honest thing, simply broke. "Yes," she whispered. The word left her, and the world did not end. It only got very, very quiet. Something moved across Damiano's face, a crack, a fracture, quickly sealed, but she saw it. She had once known this man's body better than her own. She saw the tremor he did not let reach his hands. 6 years, he said, barely a breath. You let me lose 6 years. I did it to keep him alive. Her own voice cracked now. You know what our families would have? A Rossi child from a Vitale womb. They'd have Damiano. They would have used him or killed him, and you know it. You know it. What I know, Damiano said, and now the ice was back, colder than before, is that you made that choice alone. You decided, alone, that my son was better off without his father. You made yourself judge over my blood." He leaned in, close enough that his words fell against her lips. "That's finished now, Aurora. Every choice you make from this moment, you make with me. There is no more alone. There is no more running. Do you understand? I have found you, and I do not lose things twice." Behind the gate, a bell rang. Somewhere in that building, two identical boys were learning to spell, unaware that their entire world had just been set on fire. He took her to a cafe she couldn't afford, which was to say almost any cafe, and ordered for both of them without asking. And Aurora sat across from the enemy of her blood, with her hands wrapped around a cup she couldn't taste. "You're not taking him," she said. It was the first thing she'd managed since the gate. "Whatever you think you're going to do, you're not taking my son." "Our son." The correction was quiet and immovable. "And I have no intention of taking him. Do you think I'm my father? Do you think I'd tear a 6-year-old out of the only home he knows to prove a point about ownership?" His jaw tightened. "I want him to know me. I want to be in his life. And I want you to understand that this is not a negotiation where you hold cards. I am telling you how it will be, as a courtesy, because you are his mother and because—" He stopped. "Because what?" "Because once, a long time ago, I would have burned this city to the ground for you." He said it flatly, a fact from a ledger, and it hurt worse than anything shouted. "That man is dead, but he leaves you certain considerations. So, here are the terms." "Terms," she echoed. "You and Matteo move out of that laundromat today. It's not safe. If I found you in 4 days, your father's people can find you in 5. He raised a hand before she could object. "Not into my home. I have property, a house, quiet, secure, staffed with people who answer only to me. You'll have your own wing. You'll want for nothing. And I'll begin to know my son slowly, carefully, at whatever pace protects him. And if I say no?" Damiano looked at her for a long moment, and in that look she saw the whole terrible weight of who he'd become. The empire, the fear he commanded, the absolute reach. "Then I go to a judge with a DNA test and a bank statement," he said quietly. "And I demonstrate that Matteo's mother is an unemployed woman living under a false identity in a slum with ties to organized crime, hiding a child from his father. And I take custody in a courtroom instead of offering you a home. I would very much prefer not to do that, Aurora. But do not mistake my preference for weakness. I always have the second door." The cafe hummed around them, ordinary and bright, and Aurora understood she had lost. Not the way she'd feared, dragged off, silenced, disappeared. She'd lost the way water loses to a dam. He had simply built walls around every direction she could flow. "You thought of everything," she said bitterly. "I've had 4 days and a great deal of motivation." He almost softened. "Aurora, look at me." She did. "I am not the boy from that dinner, and you are not the girl who climbed out my window. We are 2 people who share a child. I'm not asking you to love me. God knows I'm not offering it. I'm asking you to stop running long enough to let me be his father. That's all. For now, that's all. For now." The two words sat between them like a loaded gun. She thought of the text. He knows. Get out. Someone had tried to warn her, and she'd been too slow. And now here she was, and maybe, the thought crept in traitorously, maybe a fortress owned by a monster was safer than a laundromat. Her father was out there, and her father was worse. Her father would not offer a wing and a staff. Her father would offer a wall and a firing squad. There was something else, too, a thing she would not say aloud and could barely admit to herself. When Damiano had crossed the street this morning, some part of her, buried 6 years deep, had woken. It disgusted her, it terrified her, but it was there, and she was too honest a woman to pretend it wasn't. "There's something you don't know," she said suddenly. She hadn't planned to. It came out of her like a confession under torture. "Before you decide how this goes, there's something—" Her phone rang. The school. She snatched it up, ice flooding her veins. "Yes? This is his mother?" She listened. The colour left her face by degrees, and Damiano, reading her like scripture, was already rising from his chair. "What?" he said. "What's happened?" "There's been an incident at the school," she said faintly, standing, her chair scraping. "2 boys. The office says 2 boys who look identical got into some kind of... The other parents are asking questions. They want to talk to me. They're saying, Damiano, they're saying there are 2 of him." And she saw the exact moment the words landed, saw the great cold machine of Damiano Rossi's mind seize on the impossible arithmetic. 2. "Aurora," he said, very slowly, in a voice she'd never heard him use. "What did you just say?" But she was already running for the door. They arrived at the Belandi Academy in Damiano's black car, in a silence so thick it had a texture. He drove himself. He had waved off the driver with a flick of 2 fingers, and Aurora had understood. Whatever was about to happen, he wanted no witnesses. She had not answered his question in the car. She couldn't. Her whole body had become a held breath. The headmistress met them in the corridor outside the nurse's office. A brisk, elegant woman named Dottoressa Fontana, who had clearly decided that discretion was the better part of survival the instant she saw who accompanied Signora Rossi. Signore, there's been no injury, I want to reassure you. A minor tussle over a toy, nothing more. Boys." She smiled, but her eyes flicked between them with careful curiosity. "It's only that, well, it's caused something of a stir. You'll understand when you see them." "Frankly, I've never—" "Where?" said Damiano. "1 word." She stopped talking and led them. The nurse's office had 2 cots. On one sat Matteo, arms crossed, lower lip out, in the exact expression of stubborn injury Aurora knew like her own heartbeat. On the other cot sat Matteo. Aurora's mind refused it for 1 full second. Then it slotted into place with a horror so complete she felt the floor move. The same dark hair, the same cowlick on the left, the same gap where a front tooth had gone, the same jaw, the same eyes, the same everything. Because it was the same everything. Because these were 2 halves of a single split cell. Because she had carried them together and delivered them together and given one of them away with her own 2 hands. Leo. The other boy was Leo, Matteo's best friend. The child she'd met at the gate and felt a pang she wouldn't name. Her second son, in the same room, 6 years later, and she had not known. She had made herself not know. "Mamma!" Matteo brightened. Look! Look! This is Leo! We match! Everyone keeps making a big deal, but we already knew." Beside her, Damiano had gone absolutely, perfectly still. She felt it more than saw it. The stillness of a man whose entire understanding of reality was rearranging itself in real time. His eyes moved from one boy to the other, back again, and she watched him arrive, second by second, at the truth she had buried in a hospital 6 years ago. "Two," he breathed. It was not a word. It was the sound of the ground opening. A woman rose from the corner of the room. Aurora hadn't even seen her. A graceful woman in expensive, understated clothes, her face pale. Leo's adoptive mother, Signora Castellano. And her eyes, too, were moving between the boys, between the adults, adding a sum she had spent 6 years praying she'd never have to add. "I think," Signora Castellano said, and her voice trembled, "that someone owes everyone in this room an explanation." But no one was looking at her. Everyone was looking at Aurora. Matteo, sensing the strange electric weight in the air, slid off his cot and crossed to his mother and took her hand, the way he did when grown-ups got frightening. And Leo, as if pulled by the same invisible string, as if his body remembered a warmth it had known for one single night, slid off his cot and crossed to Aurora too, and stood looking up at her with those eyes, her eyes, waiting for something he couldn't name. 2 boys, her boys, one on each side, each holding a hand. And she was on her knees before she knew she'd fallen, gathering them both against her, and the sound that came out of her was 6 years old and had never once been let out before. "I'm sorry," she wept into their identical hair. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." "Aurora!" Damiano's voice cut through the room, low and shaking with something that was no longer ice. He crouched down. His eyes were wet. She had never in her life seen Damiano Rossi's eyes wet, and they were fixed on the 2 small faces that were unmistakably, undeniably, catastrophically his own. "There are 2 of them." "Yes," she whispered. "You gave one of them away." "Yes." Her voice broke completely. "God forgive me. Yes." Leo looked from the weeping stranger, who smelled somehow like a lullaby, to the tall, frightening man whose face he was young enough not to yet recognize in the mirror. And in the perfect, terrible honesty of childhood, Leo asked the question that detonated the last wall standing. "Are you my mama too?" he asked Aurora. "Because Matteo has your same nose, and I have Matteo's same nose. So—" The headmistress made a small sound. Signora Castellano sat down abruptly, and Damiano Rossi closed his eyes. And when he opened them, the man who had spent 6 years wanting justice discovered he had, without noticing, begun to simply, helplessly want. They could not have it out in a school. That much even Damiano, drowning, understood. Arrangements were made with the swift, silky efficiency that money and menace produce in equal measure. The headmistress was assured, with a look from Damiano that promised the assurance was not optional, that the matter would remain entirely private. Signora Castellano, ashen and shaking, agreed to come to the Rossi house that evening, once the children were settled, because there was no version of this that the children could witness, and no version of it that could wait. The boys, meanwhile, were delighted. Best friends who looked alike were now allowed a play date, a word Matteo pronounced with the reverence of a religious rite. That the play date was occurring inside a mansion the size of a museum only improved matters. Aurora stood at a window in a receiving room the size of her entire former apartment, watching her two sons, chase each other across a manicured lawn under the watchful eye of two of Damiano's men. And she could not stop shaking. "Drink this." She turned. Damiano held out a glass of something amber. His face had recomposed into its usual granite, but she knew him. She still knew him, and she could see the fault lines running under the stone. It's not for pleasure. It's for shock. Drink." She drank. It burned, and the burn helped, gave her body something to do besides tremble. "Tell me," he said. He sat across from her, forearms on his knees, and for a moment he did not look like a tycoon or a killer. He looked like a man who had been handed a second son and a 6-year theft in a single hour and was holding himself together by sheer will. "All of it, from the beginning. And Aurora, I will know if you leave anything out. I have spent 4 days learning your life. Tell me true, or don't tell me at all." So she told him. She told him about the morning she left his bed, the terror and the wanting, braided so tight she couldn't separate them. About the missed cycle, the doctor, the screen turned toward her, 2 heartbeats. About realizing that a Rossi Vitale child was a death sentence and that twins were worse. Twins were a legend, a target, a thing their families would have circled like wolves. She told him about the plan. How she'd gone to a lawyer, an honest one, a rarity, and arranged a birth 2 states away under a false name. How she'd held both babies exactly once. How she'd made the arithmetic, 1 mother, 1 child, invisible. But a mother and 2 identical children, a trail no false name could hide. How she'd chosen to keep one and place the other with a family the lawyer swore was good, kind, moneyed, safe. A family with no guns in the drawers. "I made one condition," she whispered, "that if it could ever be done without anyone knowing, let them grow up near each other. Not to meet, just near. So I could tell myself they breathed the same air." She laughed, a wrecked sound. "I never dreamed near would become the same classroom. I didn't know the Castellanos would move to the city. I didn't know they'd choose Belandi. God, Damiano, I made myself not know anything about them. It was the only way to survive it. And it's the reason I looked my own son in the eye at the gate this morning and felt nothing but a pang I refused to name." Damiano had not moved through any of it, but his knuckles, wrapped around his own glass, had gone white. "And the trust," he said at last. "The one paying for Belandi, the Liechtenstein shell. That's you." "That's the account the lawyer opened. There was money. Your family's people paid off my family once, years back, blood money, and it sat untouched. I used it for one thing only, to keep them near. I never took a cent for myself." Her chin lifted. "I would rather have starved. I did rather starve." Damiano stood. He walked to the window. He watched his 2 sons, collapse in a laughing heap on the grass, indistinguishable, whole. "You understand what you've done to me," he said. His voice was very quiet. You didn't take one child from me, Aurora. You took two, and then you gave one of the two to strangers. My blood, in the arms of a family whose name I'd never heard until this week. I know. You don't. He turned, and his eyes were terrible. You cannot know, because you got to hold one of them every single night for 6 years. You wept over the one you gave away, yes, but you chose the one you kept. You tucked him in. You heard his first word. I got nothing. I got a photograph, 4 days ago, of a laughing boy I'd never met. His voice cracked down the middle. And now I learn there were 2 laughing boys, and I missed both. Aurora had no defence. There was none. She had made a choice in a hospital bathroom to save 2 lives, and it had been the right choice and the wrong choice and the only choice all at once, and there was no ledger in the world that could balance it. What happens now? She asked. Damiano looked out at his sons one more time, and when he spoke the ice had returned, but under it, for the first time in 6 years, something was alive. Now, he said, we become a family, whether either of us can survive it or not. Signora Castellano came at 8, when the boys were asleep in the same enormous guest bed, having flatly refused to be parted, having fallen asleep, launched into sleep, mid-argument about whose turn it was to hold the flashlight. The woman who sat in Damiano's study now was not the composed figure from the school corridor. She had wept in her car. The evidence was still on her face. Signora Castellano, Beatrice, she said her name was Beatrice, sat with her spine very straight and her hands very still, the posture of a woman holding herself together by architecture alone. I want to say something before either of you speaks, she began, and her voice was steadier than Aurora expected. I have loved Leo since the moment they placed him in my arms. My husband and I could not have children. We waited 9 years. And then a lawyer told us there was a newborn boy, healthy, whose mother could not keep him, and we did not ask questions we were told not to ask. We signed what we were told to sign. And I have thanked God for that child every single day for 6 years. Her jaw trembled once, then stilled. So understand, whatever is decided in this room, that boy is my son. Blood or no blood, he is mine. Aurora's eyes filled. I would never. You gave him away, Beatrice said, not cruelly, but with the flat honesty of someone past pretense. I don't say it to wound you. I say it because it's the fact I've built my family on. You made a choice, and my whole life grew in the space that choice created. And now you've reappeared, and there's a man in this room who could take my son from me with a lawyer and a laboratory, and I am terrified. So let us please not pretend. Let us be 3 adults who all, in our different broken ways, love these children. And let us decide what does the least harm. Damiano had been watching her the way he watched everyone, measuring, weighing. Now something in his face shifted. You knew, he said slowly, when you enrolled him at Belandi. You knew there was a reason the trust wanted him there. You knew there might be someone. Beatrice met his eyes. I knew the adoption came with strange conditions, that the school was chosen for us, that money appeared to make it possible. I told myself it was a benefactor's whim. She looked at Aurora. But a mother knows when something is being kept from her. I chose not to look too closely because looking closely might have meant losing him. So no, I didn't know there was a twin. I didn't know there was a you. But I knew there was a shadow, and I walked my son toward it anyway, because I'm as much a coward as anyone in this room. The honesty of it silenced them all. Damiano rose, poured 3 glasses, set one before each woman, and remained standing, the way a man stands when he means to say a thing he cannot say sitting down. "Then let me be plain in return," he said. "I am Damiano Rossi. You know the name. You know what it means in this city." Beatrice's throat moved, but she held his gaze. "Which means I could do exactly what you fear. I could take the boy. No court would hold against me for long, and the ones that tried would be persuaded. I want you to understand that I can, so that you understand it means something when I tell you I won't." Beatrice went very still. "I have spent 6 years believing I had no children," Damiano continued. "Today I learned I have 2. I will not begin my fatherhood by tearing a 6-year-old from the only mother he's known and handing him to a stranger. I'm cruel, Signora Castellano. I've made peace with being cruel. But I'm not a fool, and I'm not a monster to my own blood. Leo stays with you." Beatrice's composure cracked. Just for a second, a single sob escaping before she caught it. "You mean that?" "I mean it. But—" And here the ice returned, precise and total. "He stays with you, and he comes to know me, and his brother, and his mother. There will be no more shadows, no more benefactors, no more conditions signed in the dark. If we are going to raise these boys in the same city, at the same school, as brothers who have already found each other, and they have found each other, we cannot undo that. Then we do it in the light, together. My people watch over both boys. My name protects both boys. And when they're old enough, we tell them the truth ourselves, gently, before the world tells them cruelly." He looked at Aurora, "Because the world will find out. 2 identical boys, one a Rossi's son. My enemies will do the arithmetic exactly as I did, and when they do, I want these children inside my walls, not outside them." Aurora understood then, with a lurch, the thing she'd been too shattered to grasp all day. This wasn't only about a father reclaiming his sons. This was about survival. 2 Rossi twins were not a private miracle. They were a strategic catastrophe waiting to detonate. Leverage, targets, the ultimate hostage. Her father, Damiano's rivals, anyone who wanted to break the great cold Rossi would now have not 1, but 2 soft places to press. "They're in danger," she said quietly, "now that it's known, aren't they? That's what you're really saying." Damiano's eyes met hers, and for once he did not soften the truth. "They were in danger the moment they shook hands in that cloakroom," he said. "The only question left is who gets to them first, the people who love them or the people who'd use them." He set down his glass. "I intend to be first. I intend to be first at everything from now on, including you." The last 3 words were low enough that Beatrice, gathering herself, did not seem to hear them. But Aurora did. and her traitor heart, which had spent 6 years learning to be silent, gave one loud, unforgivable beat. They moved into the Rossi house within the week. Aurora fought it the whole way. Not because she wanted the laundromat, but because moving into Damiano's home meant surrendering the last inch of the distance she'd spent 6 years building. But there was no argument left to make. The apartment was known now. The school incident had rippled, and somewhere out in the city she knew the arithmetic was already being done by people who wished her son's harm. So she took the wing he offered. 3 rooms, a view of the garden, a bed too soft to trust. And she told herself it was for the boys. The boys, for their part, thought they had died and gone to heaven. Matteo had a father now, a fact he examined with grave 6-year-old scientific curiosity, testing its limits by degrees. Could a father be asked for a second dessert? Once, never twice. Could a father be woken at dawn to look at a spider? Yes, though the father's face suggested regret. Could a father throw a boy higher into the swimming pool than any human had ever been thrown? Yes, yes, gloriously, terrifyingly yes, until a mother shouted from the terrace and the game acquired rules. And Leo came every day after school, delivered by Beatrice, who had, in the strange alchemy of shared catastrophe, become something almost like a friend to Aurora. The 2 women would sit on the terrace, watching their 4 handsworth of identical sons, and say the things that could only be said between women who had each, in her own way, been broken open by the same 2 boys. "He asked me last night," Beatrice said one evening, "why he has the same face as Matteo. I said God sometimes makes 2 of a good thing." She smiled faintly. He accepted it entirely. Children accept miracles. It's adults who need explanations. Aurora watched Damiano across the lawn, sleeves rolled up, a boy hanging off each arm, and felt something she had no right to feel move through her chest. "He's good with them," Beatrice observed, following her gaze, too shrewd by half, for a man, they say, kills people. "He is what he was raised to be," Aurora said quietly. "We both are. It's the thing that kept us apart, and now it's the thing that has to keep them safe." But at night, when the boys slept and Beatrice had gone, and the great house went quiet, the distance she'd built began, plank by plank, to fail her. Because Damiano was always there. He'd pass her in a corridor and the air would change. He'd hand her a coffee in the morning and their fingers would brush, and 6 years would collapse into a single point. He never touched her on purpose. He never said a word out of line. He was, if anything, scrupulously, maddeningly correct. And that was worse, because she could feel the leash he kept on himself, could feel the want radiating off him like heat off a stone at dusk, held back by nothing but iron will. One night she couldn't sleep and went down for water and found him in the dark kitchen. No jacket, collar open, a glass of something at his elbow, and a stack of papers he wasn't reading. He looked up. In the low light, his eyes were black. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." "I don't much, haven't for years." He turned a page he didn't read. "I keep going up to look at them, both of them, when Leo stays over. I stand in the doorway and I count them breathing. 2. A muscle moved in his jaw. I keep thinking they'll be gone if I stop counting." The confession undid her. This cold, terrible man, standing in doorways at 3 in the morning, counting the breath of children he'd known for a week. Damiano. She should have gone back upstairs. She crossed to the counter instead. I need to say something I should have said the first day, and I need you to let me say all of it before you go cold. He set down the page. He looked at her. I'm sorry, she said. Not the way I said it at the school. That was shock. I mean it clearly now, in daylight. Her voice shook but held. I told myself for 6 years that I gave them the only safety I could, and I believe that. I'd probably do it again, God help me. But believing I was right doesn't make it not a wound. I wounded you. I took something from you that can't be given back, not really. You can meet them now, you can love them now, but you can't have the 6 years. And I'm the reason. I know that. I'll know it every day for the rest of my life. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he stood and crossed to her, slow, and stopped close. Closer than correct, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his eyes, and she felt the old gravity seize her sternum and pull. Do you know what the cruelest part is? He said, very low. It's not the years. I can build over the years. I've built over worse. His gaze dropped to her mouth and returned, and the leash creaked. The cruelest part is that I looked for a reason to hate you. I wanted one. 6 years I've kept myself hollow so nothing could hurt me, and I came to find you, meaning to fill that hollow with hate. Clean, useful hate. And instead, he exhaled. Instead, I find you apologizing in my kitchen at 3 a.m, and I want to forgive you. And I don't know how to be a man who forgives. I never learned. You're asking me to do a thing I have no muscle for. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know. His hand rose. She saw it decide, saw the will lose to the want. And one knuckle brushed her jaw, barely, a touch so light it was almost worse than none. That's why I might. She did not step back. That was her sin and her surrender both. She did not step back. And Damiano Rossi, who had not lost control of anything in 6 years, took his hand away as though from a flame, and said roughly, "Go to bed, Aurora, before I do something we'll both use against ourselves in the morning." She went, but she felt his eyes on her the whole way up the stairs, and she did not sleep at all. The letter came on a Tuesday. It was not mailed. That was the first thing wrong with it. It was simply there, on the marble console inside the front doors, inside a house guarded by men who did not blink. A plain white envelope with no stamp and no name, resting where it could not possibly be unless someone had walked it past every layer of Damiano's security and set it down like a calling card. Enzo found it. Enzo did not touch it. Enzo called Damiano, and Damiano came and stood over it for a long moment before lifting it with a handkerchief. Inside, a single photograph. 2 boys, in the school courtyard, taken from a distance through a long lens. Identical. Unmistakable. And across the bottom, in block capitals cut from a magazine, 2 roses on 1 stem. How careful you must be, Damiano. Gardens burn. Damiano's face did not change. That was the frightening thing about him. The worse it got, the stiller he became. But Enzo, who had known him 30 years, saw the pulse jump once at his temple. "When," Damiano said, "cameras show nothing, which is impossible, which means someone got to the cameras, which means someone inside." Damiano set the photograph down with terrible gentleness.
Or someone who owns someone inside.
He was silent a moment. Who moves like this? Who has the reach to walk into my house and the taste to leave poetry? Vitale, Enzo said. Salvatore Vitale has the reach, and the family's always had a taste for the theatrical. Salvatore doesn't know the boys exist. If he knew Aurora had borne Rossi twins, he wouldn't send a poem. He'd send an army, and he'd send it years ago. Damiano's eyes narrowed. No, this is someone who's watching me now. Someone who learned what I learned when I learned it. Someone who's been close enough to know the boys found each other. He turned, which brings us back to inside. Upstairs, Aurora was reading to the boys, both boys, Leo staying the night again, when Damiano appeared in the doorway. She knew instantly. She'd spent her girlhood in a Mafia house. She could read a man's shoulders the way other people read weather. "Finish the story," he said, mildly, for the children. "Then come find me." The boys, blessedly oblivious, demanded the dragon be defeated first. She defeated the dragon. She kissed 2 identical foreheads, turned off the lamp, and went cold-legged down to his study. He showed her the photograph. She had to sit down. "Someone's threatening them," she whispered. "Someone knows." "Someone's threatening me," Damiano corrected. "Through them. There's a difference, and the difference matters. A person who wanted the boys dead wouldn't announce it. This is leverage. Someone establishing that they can reach me, so that later they can ask me for something." His jaw tightened. "Which means we have a little time. Not much, but some." "My father isn't this. I've considered it. This is closer. This is someone who watched the school incident ripple, who put together the twins, who knew to leave it in this house." He looked at her, and the look had a new edge. "Aurora, when you disappeared 6 years ago, who helped you?" "No one. I did it alone." "No one disappears alone. You had money, the trust, you had a lawyer, you had a false identity clean enough to survive my people for 6 years, and that is not something a grieving pregnant girl does by herself." He leaned forward. "Someone helped you vanish. Someone who knew the whole truth, the pregnancy, the twins, the adoption, all of it, and that someone is the only other person on this earth who knows there are 2. His voice dropped. "So who was it?" Aurora's mouth had gone dry, because she knew. She'd known the instant she saw the poetry, and she'd been pushing it away. "There was a man," she said slowly. He was my father's consigliere's son. Younger. He'd always been kind to me when we were children. When I got pregnant and panicked, he's the one I went to. He arranged the lawyer, the money, the false name." She swallowed. "He swore to me on his mother's grave that he'd take it to his own. He was the only one who ever knew about the twins. His name is Marco. Marco Ferraro." Damiano went very still. "Marco Ferraro," he repeated softly. "You know him?" "I know him." Something dangerous moved behind his eyes. "Marco Ferraro left the Vitale family 4 years ago, went independent, built himself a nice little operation in the gaps between the families. Information, mostly. He sells things, Aurora. Secrets. Leverage. He rose slowly. You handed the single most valuable secret in this city to a man who grew up to sell secrets for a living. The room tilted. He wouldn't. He swore. He sent you a warning text, didn't he? Damiano's eyes locked on hers. 4 days ago. He knows about the boy. Get out. That was Marco, wasn't it? She hadn't told him about the text. Her silence answered. So, Damiano said, and his voice was the sound of a door closing on a vault. Marco Ferraro knows everything. Marco Ferraro warned you to run, which failed, so now the secret's live, and I've found you. And now, 4 days later, a photograph of 2 roses appears inside my locked house.
He picked up the envelope. He's not warning you anymore, Aurora.
He's selling. And he's letting me know the price is about to be named. Marco Ferraro agreed to meet, which surprised no one who understood men like Marco. Men like Marco loved to be wanted. They mistook being wanted for being safe. The meeting was set at the Voluto Club, after hours on neutral gold. Damiano chose it deliberately, his own ground dressed as no one's ground. He went with Enzo and 2 others. He did not tell Aurora he was going. She found out because she had learned in a week to read the house, and an empty house at midnight reads loud. She was waiting in the dark of his study when he returned at 3. You went to see him. She rose from the chair. You went to see Marco, and you didn't tell me. You'd have wanted to come. He was my friend. He is a man who is selling our children to the highest bidder, Damiano said flatly, shrugging off his jacket, and something in the line of his shoulders told her the meeting had gone badly. And no, he wasn't your friend. Friends don't keep a decade's worth of dirt on you filed and ready. Sit down. You'll want to be sitting. She sat. He didn't send the photograph, Damiano said. She blinked. What? He swears it, and I believe him, which cost me something, because I'd have enjoyed it being him. He poured 2 glasses, handed her one. Marco's a coward. Cowards don't leave poetry in the houses of men who could feed them into the harbour. He warned you to run because, his words, he'd always had a soft spot for you and didn't want to see you hurt when the truth broke.
Then, when you didn't run, he did the mathematics a coward does. He realized the secret was about to become worthless the moment I found the boys myself. A secret only sells while it's secret. He drank. So he tried to sell it fast, 4 days ago. To me. To you. He offered to tell me, for a price, that I had a son. I already knew. I told him so. It deflated him considerably. A grim flicker of satisfaction. But here is the part that matters, Aurora. Here's what he told me for free, out of fear, once he understood I already held the cards. He offered you to me the way a coward offers everyone to everyone. Damiano set down his glass. Marco did sell the secret, just not to me. A week ago, before I ever found you, someone came to him, someone who already suspected. Someone who paid Marco a great deal of money to confirm that Aurora Vitali had borne twins and given one away, and to confirm the father's name. The blood left her face. Who? Damiano looked at her for a long moment, and she understood he was deciding how much mercy to show, and understood from his eyes that there wasn't any to show. Your father, he said. The glass slipped in her hand. She caught it. Salvatore Vitali has known for 1 week that his daughter is alive, Damiano said, that she bore 2 sons to his sworn enemy, and that she gave one away to strangers.
Marco sold him all of it. The poem in my house wasn't a rival's leverage, Aurora. It was your father's message. 2 roses on 1 stem. Gardens burn. His voice was very quiet. He's telling me he knows about both boys. He's telling me he can reach them. And he's telling me, in the way your family has always loved, with flowers and threats braided together, that he intends to collect his blood. Aurora was shaking her head, slow, helpless. He wouldn't hurt them. They're his grandsons. They're Rossi grandsons. The words fell like stones. Half my blood runs in them. To a man like your father, that's not a grandchild. That's a humiliation with a heartbeat. His daughter, in the enemy's bed twice over, 2 living proofs that a Vitale girl chose a Rossi. Damiano crossed to her, crouched before her chair, took the glass from her unsteady hand. I need you to hear me, because you grew up in that house, and you keep reaching for the father you wanted instead of the man he is. Would Salvatore Vitale use 2 children to break Damiano Rossi, to finally win a war 3 generations old? She wanted to say no. She had grown up in that house. She had seen what her father did to men who crossed him. She had seen the careful, smiling, flower-sending cruelty of him. She had run from that house pregnant precisely because she'd known, in her bones, what he'd do to a Rossi child. Yes, she whispered. The truth broke out of her like blood from a wound. He would. God forgive me, he would. Damiano's hand closed over hers, and for the first time it was not gravity or hunger or want. It was an alliance, being forged in the only fire hot enough to fuse 2 enemies. Then we stop pretending we're on opposite sides, he said. Your family or mine, Vitale or Rossi, whatever we were. It's over. As of tonight, there is exactly 1 side, and it has 2 members, and everything it owns is asleep upstairs, breathing in the dark. His grip tightened. Are you with me, Aurora? Not against your father, for them. All the way, no window to climb out of this time. Are you with me? She looked at the man she'd spent 6 years running from, the enemy of her blood, the father of her sons, and she made the second impossible choice of her life. All the way, she said. No window. The house became a fortress in 48 hours. Aurora watched it happen with a strange, grim awe. She'd grown up around power, but the Vitale kind had always been loud, men and guns and shouting. Damiano's power was silent and total. Men she never saw rendered the perimeter airtight. The boys' school was quietly informed that Signor Rossi's private security would now be present. The school, having felt the temperature of Signor Rossi, did not argue. Beatrice and her husband were moved gently and without the option of refusal into the guest house on the grounds, because 2 roses on 1 stem could not be protected in 2 different gardens. I feel like a prisoner, Beatrice admitted, unpacking in a suite larger than her home. You feel like a mother whose child is safe, Aurora said. It only feels like prison because the walls are visible. Mine were always invisible. Trust me, visible is better. The 2 women had become, in the crucible of it, genuinely bound. There was no jealousy left. That had burned off in the first days, when it became clear that neither could have Leo without the other, that the boy needed a mother who'd raised him and a mother who'd borne him and could not be made to choose. They co-parented across a chasm that should have been impossible and made it work, because the alternative was unthinkable. The boys, of course, thought the security was a game. Matteo had named the guards. There was Mountain and Whisper and the Sad One, and their favourite, a granite-faced soldier the twins had jointly christened Signor Sunshine, who had, against every professional instinct, developed a helpless fondness for the two small tyrants, and could be seen, when he thought no one watched, letting them hide behind his enormous frame during their endless games. And through all of it, Damiano and Aurora circled each other, closer each day, the leash fraying. It broke on the 9th night. There'd been a scare, a car that idled too long outside the school gates that turned out to be nothing, a lost tourist, but for 20 minutes no one had known that, and Aurora had lived those 20 minutes with her heart in her throat. And when it resolved, she'd gone up to the boys' room and stood, counting them, breathing exactly the way Damiano had described, and understood him completely for the first time. He found her there, in the dark doorway, counting. 2, he said softly behind her. 2, she agreed. They stood a while in the dark, two parents in a doorway, and something between them that had been fighting for a week, simply, quietly, gave up the fight. She turned. He was very close. The corridor light caught one side of his face and left the rest to shadow, and his eyes were on her, the way they'd been on her across a truce dinner 7 years ago, the gravity reaching out, and this time there was no window. She'd said so herself, no window. I have been, Damiano said, low, extraordinarily well behaved. I've noticed. I want you to notice that it's costing me. I don't want you to think it's indifference. His hand rose, slow, giving her every chance to step back, and she did not step back. His fingers threaded into her hair. 6 years I told myself I'd killed this, that the man who wanted you like a fever was dead. His thumb traced her cheekbone. He's not dead, Aurora. He's been in a box. And you keep standing in doorways in the dark, counting our children, and he is tearing the box apart. Damiano, tell me to stop. His mouth was a breath from hers. You told me once you'd never ask me to love you. Fine, don't ask. Just tell me to stop, and I will. And I'll be well behaved again. And we'll raise them as partners, and nothing more. And I'll die a little every day, and never say so. His forehead dropped to hers. But if you don't tell me to stop. She didn't tell him to stop. She kissed him. 7 years and 2 children and 3 generations of blood, and she rose up and kissed the enemy of her family in a dark doorway. And the box came apart entirely. He kissed her like a man coming up from underwater. He kissed her like restitution and hunger and grief all braided into one. His arms came around her and lifted her half off her feet, and she felt the whole leashed force of him, finally, gloriously off its chain. And she wound her arms around his neck and let herself, for the first time in 6 years, want out loud. They did not go far. They could not. 2 children slept 10 feet away. But he pressed her back against the corridor wall and kissed her until she forgot her own name, until the 6 years collapsed into nothing, until there was only this, his hands and his mouth and the low, broken sound he made against her throat when she said his name. I'm not letting you go, he said against her skin. It was not romantic. It was a fact, a vow, a threat. Do you understand me? Whatever happens with your father, however this ends, you're not climbing out any windows. You're mine now, Aurora Vitale. You and both those boys. And I will burn this city and everyone in it before I lose any of the three of you again. And Aurora, who had spent her whole life being owned by dangerous men, found that being claimed by this one, chosen, wanted, refused surrender, felt for the first time not like a cage. It felt like coming home. Salvatore Vitale sent for his daughter 3 days later. Not with soldiers. That was the terror of him. He never did the obvious thing. He sent a letter, handwritten on the cream stationery Aurora had known her whole childhood, and it was addressed to her in her father's own elegant hand, and it said only, "Daughter, come to Sunday dinner. Bring nothing and no one. We have a great deal to discuss, you and I, about the future of my grandsons. Refuse me, and I will send my regards to them at school instead." Papa. Aurora read it standing in the kitchen and had to grip the counter. Damiano read it over her shoulder, and she felt him go to stone. "You're not going," he said. "He'll go to the school. You're not going. It's a trap so obvious it's insulting. He takes you, he has leverage over me and the boys both. Absolutely not. And if I don't go, he sends his regards to 2 6-year-olds. She turned on him. "You don't know him. This is how he does it. He makes you choose the least horrible cage. There's no door that isn't a trap. The only question is which trap we walk into with our eyes open." Her voice cracked. "I have to go, Damiano. But I go smart. I go having decided what I'll give and what I won't. I go as his daughter, who he still, in whatever broken way, believes he can control." Damiano stared at her, jaw working, and she watched him war with himself. The man who wanted to lock her in a tower, fighting the man who knew, tactically, that she was right. "You go wired," he said finally. "You go with my people on every corner of that block. You go, and if you're not out in 90 minutes, I come in, and I do not come in quietly. He'll search me for a wire. He always searches. Then you go without one, and you memorize every word, and you get out." He took her face in both hands, rough with fear he'd never name as fear. "Aurora, I have found you once. I will not survive finding you a second time. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I've killed men for less than making me afraid, and you make me afraid, and I—" He stopped, breathed. "Come back to me. That's an order. That's the only order I've ever begged." She kissed him. "I'll come back." Sunday came the way dread always comes, too fast and too slow at once. The Vitale mansion had not changed. That was the first blow. The same iron gates, the same cypress drive, the same marble foyer where she'd learned to walk and learned to fear. The soldiers at the door were older versions of the ones from her childhood. They searched her, thoroughly, apologetically, the way you search family you don't trust, and found no wire, because there was none. Her father was waiting in the dining room, at the head of the table where he'd sat her whole life. Salvatore Vitale was older now, silver-haired, but the eyes were the same, and the eyes were the thing. cold and warm at once, which was the worst combination a father's eyes can be. "Aurora." He rose. He opened his arms. "My daughter, alive. Do you know I mourned you? I built you a grave. There's a stone in the family plot with your name on it. I visited it." He embraced her, and she let him, and it was like being embraced by a beautiful glacier. "And all the while you were 3 miles away, raising my grandson in a hovel, giving my other grandson to strangers." He held her at arm's length, and the warmth drained from his eyes by degrees. "To Rossi's whelps, no less. 2 of them. Twins." He said the word like a slur. "You always did have a flair for the theatrical, my love. But this surpasses even my expectations of you. Papa, sit." She sat. "Let me tell you how this will go," Salvatore said, settling back into his chair, pouring wine with steady hands. "Because I know you spent a week in Rossi's fortress, and I know he's filled your head with fortress thoughts. So let me clarify the actual situation." He slid a glass toward her. "You have given me a gift, Aurora, though you meant it as a wound. Do you understand? For 3 generations we have tried to break the Rossis, and we could not, because they had nothing to lose. Damiano especially. A man with nothing to lose is a man who cannot be threatened." He smiled, and it was the smile that had frightened her since childhood. And now the great Damiano Rossi has 2 things to lose. 2 small, identical, breakable things. He sipped. "You didn't hide his sons from him, my darling. You manufactured his weakness. And you've delivered it, gift-wrapped, to me." The room went cold around her. She had known it would be bad. She had not let herself know it would be this. "You won't touch them," she said. Her voice did not shake, and she was proud of that, distantly, from very far away. "They're your blood. They're his blood." Her father's face didn't change. "And blood, my love, has always been the whole point of everything we do." "I'm not going to hurt them," Salvatore Vitale said, and let the sentence hang just long enough to be a lie. "Not if I don't have to. I'm not a monster, whatever your Rossi has told you. They're children, blood of my blood, even diluted." He turned his wine glass by the stem. "But I am a businessman, Aurora, and a general in a war your generation seems to have forgotten we're fighting. And 2 Rossi heirs are the most valuable asset to cross this city in 50 years. So, here is what I want." She waited. She had learned in this house that the waiting was where you gathered yourself. "Damiano Rossi controls the eastern ports," her father said, "has for a decade. It's the artery of everything that comes in, everything that goes out. Your grandfather died trying to take those ports. My brother died trying. I have bled for them my whole life, and they have stayed Rossi." He leaned forward. "I want them signed to me, legally, cleanly, permanently. And I want Damiano Rossi to sign them over himself, publicly, so that every family in this city watches the great Rossi kneel." "He'll never—" "He will," Salvatore said, "if the alternative is his sons. That's the beauty of what you've built for me, my love. I don't have to win the war anymore. I just have to hold the 2 things he can't live without and let him hand me the victory to keep them breathing." He smiled again. You'll carry the message. You're the natural courier. You love them both, him and me, in your confused way. Tell him, the port's for the boys. He has 1 week. And tell him I'll know if he tries anything clever, because I have known where those children are every hour since Marco sang, and I can reach them any time I choose. The photograph in his foyer was a courtesy, a demonstration. Next time, it won't be a photograph. Aurora sat very still, and something was happening inside her that she had not planned and could not stop. For 6 years she had run from this man. For her whole life before that she had feared him, and she had carried all that time a small, childish splinter of hope. That somewhere under the ice her father loved her. That the warmth in his eyes was real, even if the cruelty was too. That if she ever came home he might be glad. And now she sat at his table and listened to him weigh her sons like port tonnage, and the splinter, finally, cleanly, came out. "You built a grave for me," she said quietly. Salvatore blinked at the turn. "I did. I mourned you sincerely. You mourned the daughter who was useful, the chess piece who'd marry your alliance." She stood. She was surprised to find her legs held her. "And now I've come back holding 2 pieces worth more. And you don't see your grandsons, you don't see me, you see inventory. You always did. I just spent my whole childhood pretending the warmth in your eyes meant something other than appetite." She was crying, but her voice was steel. "It doesn't. It never did. You don't have a heart, Papa. You have a ledger where your heart should be, and you've just entered 2 little boys into it." The warmth left Salvatore's eyes entirely then, and she saw, at last and completely, the thing that had ruled her childhood. Not a father at all, but a predator wearing a father's face. "Sit down," he said softly. "No. Aurora." He rose. "You will carry my message, and you will do it because you are not a fool. You've seen what I do to men who defy me. Do you imagine I'll be gentler with a daughter who put my enemy's seed in my bloodline?" He came around the table. "You have no cards. You never did. You have only the choice of how much everyone suffers on the way to the outcome I've already decided. So carry the message. Be a good girl for once in your ungrateful life, and perhaps, when the ports are mine and Rossi is broken, I'll let you keep one of the boys." One of the boys. The words detonated in her. He'd said it so casually. Let you keep one. As though she'd not already lived the nightmare of choosing between them once. As though the single worst act of her life were a favour he might grant. And in the white silence after those words, Aurora Vitali understood something that changed everything. She understood that she was not going to carry his message. She understood that there was no bargain here, because a man who offered to let her keep one was a man who had already decided to take both, the boys as leverage, then as blood, then as the final humiliation of the Rossi line. The ports were a story. The ports were the thing he'd say out loud, but the true appetite, the real ledger entry, was the erasure of Rossi from the earth, and 2 Rossi children were not a price he'd release. They were a prize he'd keep. She had walked in believing there was a trap with a door. She understood now there was no door. There had never been a door. There was only her father and her sons, and the oldest arithmetic in her family's blood. Someone was going to bleed, and the only choice left was whose. "You're right," she said, and made her voice small, made it broken, made it the voice of the beaten daughter he wanted. "I have no cards. I'll carry your message." Salvatore smiled, satisfied, and did not see, because men like her father never saw, that was their single flaw, that his daughter had just stopped being his daughter and become something far more dangerous. A Rossi's mother, choosing her side, with no window left to climb through. She came out of the Vitale mansion at 81 minutes, 9 short of the deadline that would have brought Damiano through the walls, and he was out of the car before it fully stopped, crossing the pavement in 3 strides, taking her by the shoulders, searching her face. "You're all right. Tell me you're all right." "I'm all right." She was shaking. "Get me away from here first, then I'll tell you everything. All of it. Damiano," her voice fractured. "It's so much worse than we thought, and it's clearer. I know what he is now. I finally, completely know." They didn't speak until the fortress swallowed them, until she'd gone up and looked at both boys breathing in the dark, until she'd washed her father's house off her skin. Then she came down to the study where Damiano waited with Enzo, and she told them. The ports, the 1-week deadline, the public signing, the kneeling, the photograph as a courtesy. Next time it won't be a photograph. And then the last thing. Perhaps I'll let you keep one of the boys. Damiano had listened to all of it in perfect stillness. But at that last sentence, something moved in him that she'd never seen. Not the cold, not the controlled fury, but a pure and total darkness, brief as a shutter, that made even Enzo look away. "He said that," Damiano repeated, very quietly. "He said that." Damiano stood. He walked to the window. The city glittered beneath him, 40 floors of other people's ordinary lives. "He's not going to release them," Aurora said. "That's what I understood in there, at the end. The ports are a story he tells to make it sound like a deal, but there's no version where he gets the ports and gives back 2 Rossi heirs. He'll take the ports, and then he'll keep the boys, and he'll use them to bleed you dry, favour by favour, forever. Or he'll erase them, and you with them, and call it winning the war." She swallowed. "I know him. I grew up watching him do exactly this to smaller men. He always takes the down payment and then renegotiates from a stronger position. Always." "She's right," Enzo said grimly. "It's how the Vitales have operated for 50 years. The stated price is never the real price." Damiano was silent for a long moment. "Then we don't pay the stated price," he said. "And we don't pay the real one. We change the game entirely." He turned. "Aurora, I need you to tell me something, and I need the truth, however it lands. When you were in that house, did any part of you want to stay? Did any part of you look at your father and want, still, to be his daughter?" She understood why he asked. He was about to trust her with the lives of their children against her own blood, and he needed to know the splinter was truly out. "He built me a grave," she said, "and offered to let me keep one of my sons in the same hour. Whatever daughter he had died in that room, Damiano, permanently. I'm not carrying his message, I'm carrying yours." Something in Damiano eased, not softened, he never softened, but settled, like a structure finding its true foundation. "Good," he said. "Then here's what we're going to do. and it's going to frighten you, and I need you steady anyway." He laid it out. "Your father believes he holds the only leverage, the boys, and his ability to reach them. That belief is his weakness, because it's out of date. He thinks the boys are still soft targets I'm desperate to protect at any cost. He doesn't understand that in the last 2 weeks I've turned this family into a fortress and turned you, his own daughter, his own courier, against him. He's playing a hand he thinks he can see, and he's holding old cards. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to accept his terms," Damiano said, "publicly. I'm going to agree to the signing. I'm going to let every family in this city gather to watch Damiano Rossi kneel and hand Salvatore Vitale the ports." He smiled, and it was the most frightening thing she'd ever seen on his face. "And your father, who cannot resist theatre, who has waited 3 generations for exactly this spectacle, is going to insist on doing it in person, in public, in front of everyone who matters. He won't be able to help himself. The humiliation of a Rossi is the whole point. It has to be witnessed." Understanding began to dawn, cold and electric, down Aurora's spine. "You're drawing him out," she breathed. "You're using his vanity, his need to be seen winning. A man who works only through letters and photographs and cowards like Marco is a man who never has to stand in the open," Damiano said. "But a man who wants 3 generations of enemies to watch him win, that man has to show his face. He has to be in the room. And once Salvatore Vitale is in a room I've chosen, on a night I've chosen, believing he's already won." He let it hang. Then, for the first time in 50 years, a Vitale will be standing on Rossi ground with his guard down, drunk on victory, surrounded by witnesses he brought himself. Enzo exhaled slowly. "It's insane. It could work, and it's insane. If he smells it—" "He won't smell it," Aurora said, and both men looked at her. Her eyes had gone hard and certain. "Because it comes from me. I'll carry it back to him. Damiano's surrender, the whole beautiful, humiliating spectacle. And my father will believe it, because he's spent my whole life believing I'm a chess piece too frightened to be anything else." Her jaw set. "He taught me to be a courier. Fine. I'll be the best courier he ever had. I'll walk his own trap right back into his hands." Damiano looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd run from him, robbed him, wrecked him, and was now offering to betray her own father to save the sons they'd made. And something in his eyes she'd never seen there before finally surfaced and stayed. "When this is over," he said, low, only for her, "I'm going to marry you. Not to protect anyone, not for the boys, for me. Because I've been dead for 6 years, and you're the only thing that's ever made me want to be alive, and I am finished pretending otherwise." It was not a question. Damiano Rossi did not ask questions. "I know," Aurora said, and, impossibly, in the middle of the darkest night of her life, she smiled. The week that followed was the longest of Aurora's life, and she had lived some long ones. She carried the message back to her father, not in person, he'd not risk having her in the house twice, but through the channel he'd established, and she performed the beaten daughter so well she frightened herself. She reported Damiano's rage, his despair, his eventual crumbling. She reported that the great Rossi would sign, would kneel, would do it publicly to buy his son's safety, and that he had one condition of his own, the only one Salvatore would find plausible. that it be done at neutral ground at the Voluto Club before the assembled families, so that the surrender would be witnessed and therefore binding, so that Salvatore could never later deny the ports were freely given. It was a masterstroke, and it worked exactly as Damiano had predicted, because it gave Salvatore the one thing he wanted more than the ports themselves: an audience. He agreed within the hour, Aurora reported that night. He's already sending word to the other families. He wants them all there. Damiano, he's treating it like a coronation. He's having a suit made.
Of course he is. Damiano didn't look up from the papers he and Enzo were bent over. Floor plans of the Voluto, sightlines, exits, marked in a hand she couldn't read. Vanity is the most reliable weapon in the world. It's the only one that never jams. But the tactical calm was a surface. Underneath, the house lived in a state of held breath. The boys felt it, the way children always feel it. Matteo grew clingy. Leo woke with nightmares he couldn't describe. Aurora and Beatrice took turns sitting in the boys' room until they slept, two mothers in the dark. And one night, Beatrice said quietly, "If it goes wrong, on the night, I need you to know I'll take them and run and never stop. And I need to know you'll let me, even if it means you never see them again. Because between the two of us, I'm the one no one is watching." Aurora had wept then, silently, and taken Beatrice's hand and said, "Yes, if it goes wrong, you run, and you don't look back, and knowing they're with you will be the only thing that lets me die easy." They did not tell Damiano they'd made that pact. Some things belong only to mothers, and in the spaces between the fear, something else grew. Because grief and terror, Aurora was learning, don't crowd love out. They make room for it. They strip away everything that isn't essential until only the true things remain. Damiano came to her every night now. Not for the fever, though the fever was there always, banked and burning, but for the hours after, when he'd hold her in the dark and slowly, in fragments, tell her the 6 years she'd missed. How he'd built the empire out of spite and emptiness. How he'd stood at his mother's deathbed and been unable to weep. How he'd bought the Voluto Club for the single reason that she'd once sung there and had never told a soul, and had sat in its private booth 100 nights just to be in a room she'd stood in. "That's mad," she whispered against his chest. "It's the sanest thing I did in 6 years. His hand moved slow through her hair. Everything else was noise. That was the one true thing. I couldn't have you, so I bought the last place you'd been happy, and I sat in it in the dark, like a ghost, haunting my own life." He was quiet a moment. "And now I'm going to end your father in that same room. There's a symmetry to it I can't decide is beautiful or grotesque." "Both," she said. "Everything about us is both." On the 5th night, she asked the questions she'd been avoiding. "What happens to him, my father, on the night?" She felt him go still. "I need to know. I've made my choice, but I have to know what I'm choosing." Damiano was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Do you want the truth?" he said finally, "or the kind version?" "When have I ever wanted the kind version?" She felt him almost smile. Then, "Your father has spent 50 years building a machine of violence. It doesn't stop because I lock him in a cellar. If he lives, he spends the rest of his life trying to reach the boys, from prison, from exile,
from anywhere. Men are loyal to him. The threat doesn't end while he breathes. He drew a slow breath. You know this. You grew up in it. You know how it ends. You've known since the day you ran. She had. God help her, she had. I'm not asking you to bless it, Damiano said quietly. I'm not asking you to be in the room. When it happens, you'll be here, with the boys, with Beatrice, so that whatever your heart does afterward, your hands are clean and your children are safe. I'll carry it. It's mine to carry. I've carried worse for less. His arm tightened around her. But I won't lie to you and call it something it isn't. This is the world we were born into, Aurora. You tried to escape it by hiding. I'm going to end it by finishing it. Those are the only two doors that were ever real, and hiding didn't work. She lay against him in the dark, and she thought about the father who'd built her a grave, who'd offered to let her keep one son, who'd entered 2 children into his ledger without a flicker. She thought about the man who'd made her, and the men he'd made bleed, and the 50 years of it. And she understood that she was being asked to choose between the blood that made her and the blood she'd made. It was not, in the end, a hard choice. It only felt like it should be. When it's done, she said, don't tell me the details. Ever. Let me not know. Let me keep the version where I said goodbye to my father a long time ago in a hospital bathroom and never saw him again. Done. And Damiano. She lifted her head, found his eyes in the dark. Come back to me. That's my only order. Whatever happens in that room, you come back up these stairs and you count our children breathing with me. You don't get to end my father's war and then leave me a widow before I'm even a wife. Do you hear me? His hand cupped her face. I've spent 6 years learning I can survive anything, he said. You're the first thing I've ever had that I couldn't. So yes, Aurora, I'll come back, because for the first time in my life, I have a reason to. 2 days remained. The families received their invitations. That was how Salvatore styled them. Invitations, the theatre of a man who'd already crowned himself. Word rippled through the city's underworld like current through water. The Rossi is going to kneel. Vitale has broken him. Come and see. The Voluto Club would host the surrender in 3 nights, and every family that mattered would send its head to witness the end of a war older than any of them. Aurora, playing the beaten courier to the last, sent her father one final message, that Damiano wished to bring his sons to the signing, that he wanted Salvatore to see with his own eyes that the boys were the reason he knelt. Her father's total surrender, made visible. It was the hook inside the hook. And her father, whose vanity Damiano had read like scripture, took it whole. Bring them, Salvatore wrote back, and Aurora could hear the gloating in every stroke of the pen. Let the little Rossis watch their father learn who owns this city. It will be a lesson they carry their whole lives. Papa. He signed it, Papa. Even now, even sending word to gloat over grandchildren he meant to use and discard. Papa. Aurora read it and folded it, and felt the last of her grief harden into something clean and cold and useful. He thinks the boys will be there, she told Damiano. They won't be. He thinks I'll deliver them to him myself. You'll deliver him something, Damiano said, but it won't be the boys. He looked at her across the dark study, and the plan hung finished between them, terrible and elegant and complete. 3 nights, Aurora. 3 nights, and the war your family started when your grandfather was young ends in a room I bought because you sang in it once. He crossed to her, took her hands. After that, there's no more running, no more hiding, no more Vitale and Rossi. There's just us and 2 boys, and whatever ordinary life 2 people like us can steal out of all this blood. "Do you think we can?" she whispered. "Steal an ordinary life after everything?" "No," he said honestly, "not ordinary. We're not built for ordinary." He kissed her knuckles, one at a time, but something, ours, safe, loud with children. "I've never wanted anything so much I was afraid of it. I want that so much I'm afraid of it." He held her eyes. 3 nights. 3 nights, she echoed. And somewhere across the city, an old predator had a suit made and rehearsed his gloating, and did not know that the daughter he'd taught to be a chess piece had learned, at last, to move. The Voluto Club had never looked more like a temple, and Salvatore Vitale had never looked more like a man come to be worshipped. He arrived at 10, in the suit he'd had made, silver hair swept back, and he moved through the assembled families the way a king moves through a coronation, nodding, blessing, accepting the low murmurs of men who had come to watch a 50-year war end in his favour. The heads of 6 families were there. Consiglieri, capos, the whole gilded machinery of the city's underworld, gathered under the gold light to witness the impossible, the kneeling of a Rossi. Damiano waited for him on the mezzanine, alone, apparently, a man stripped of his power, come to surrender it. He wore no weapon anyone could see. He looked to the gathered families exactly like what Salvatore had promised them, a broken man about to give up the ports his blood had held for a decade. That was the performance. Under it, in the ways only Enzo and a handful of others knew, the Voluto was not a neutral club at all. It was a closed fist, and every man in Salvatore's escort had walked into it believing he was a guest, when he was, in fact, already surrounded. "Damiano," Salvatore climbed the stairs slowly, savouring each one. "You look unwell. Grief does that to a man. Or is it the anticipation of humiliation? I've heard it's exquisite." He settled into the chair across the booth, as though it were a throne. "I confess, I'm disappointed your sons aren't here yet. I was promised a lesson for the little Rossis." "They're coming," Damiano said. His voice was flat, beaten, perfect. "With their mother. She insisted on preparing them. You know Aurora." "I know Aurora." Salvatore's smile widened. "I know she's spent her whole life doing what frightened men tell her to. You frightened her into your bed, I see. Well, she always did have a weakness for the enemy." He gestured at the folder on the table between them, the documents, the transfer of the ports, drawn up and waiting for a signature. "Shall we?" "The families are impatient to watch. Sign, kneel, and I may even let you keep visiting the boys. On my terms, of course. Everything from now on is on my terms." Damiano looked at the folder. He looked at the old man across from him, the man who'd built Aurora a grave, who'd entered 2 children into a ledger, who'd taught the woman Damiano loved to be a piece instead of a player. And then Damiano did something Salvatore Vitale had not accounted for, because vanity never accounts for it. He smiled. "You know what I never understood about your family," Damiano said conversationally, not touching the folder. "In 3 generations of this war, you always mistook theatre for strength. Your grandfather, your brother, you all needed to be seen winning. It was never enough to hold power. You had to make everyone watch you hold it." He leaned back. "It's why you're all dead, or about to be. A man who needs an audience has just told the whole world where he'll be standing and when, and with his guard down." Something flickered in Salvatore's eyes, the first cold touch of wrongness. "The boys aren't coming," Damiano continued. "They were never coming. They're safe, somewhere you'll never reach, with 2 mothers and men who'd die before letting your shadow fall on them. Aurora sent you every message you wanted to hear because I told her to, and you believed every one, because you've spent her whole life believing she's too frightened to be anything but your creature." His smile vanished. "You taught your own daughter to be a courier, Salvatore. You just never imagined she'd carry a message you didn't write." Salvatore moved, fast for an old man, his hand going toward his jacket, and found that the 2 soldiers he'd posted at the top of the stairs were no longer his, that the men below, the ones he'd brought, were standing very still, with Rossi hands on their shoulders, that the gold-lit temple he'd walked into as a king had, without a single shot, without a single raised voice, closed silently around him like a throat. The families watched. That was the thing Salvatore had wanted, witnesses, and now he had them, and they watched the 50-year war end exactly as he'd promised, except with the wrong man surrounded. "You'd do this in front of everyone," Salvatore breathed. "You'd break the peace in front of 6 families." "There is no peace," Damiano said. "There's your family and mine, and a war your blood started, and 2 boys caught in the middle of it who never asked to be born a Vitale or a Rossi." He rose. He buttoned his jacket, slow, deliberate. "You made one mistake, Salvatore. Just one. You thought 2 children were a weakness you could press." He looked down at the man who'd tormented the woman he loved. "You were half right. They're a weakness. They're the only one I have. But you never understood the difference between a man with something to lose and a man with something to protect." His voice dropped to nothing. "A man with something to lose is careful. A man with something to protect is capable of anything at all." The families watched, and no one, that night, moved to help Salvatore Vitale. Aurora did not go to the Veluto. She kept her word, and Damiano kept his, and she spent that longest of all nights in the fortress with the boys and Beatrice, in a locked wing behind 3 rings of men, waiting for a phone to ring or a war to come through the walls. The boys slept, finally, after an eternity of not sleeping, 2 identical dark heads on one pillow, because they still refused to be parted, and Aurora sat between the bed and the door, with a stillness she'd learned from her father, and would spend the rest of her life unlearning. Beatrice sat across from her. Neither woman spoke, There was nothing to say that wasn't a prayer, and they'd both run out of those hours ago. At 2:14 in the morning, the phone lit. One word from Enzo, as arranged. Home. It meant, it's over. It worked. He's coming home. It did not say what over meant. It did not need to. Aurora had asked never to know the details, and she never would. She let the phone go dark, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, and she wept, silently, so as not to wake the boys. And Beatrice came and knelt and held her. And the two mothers wept together in the dark for everything that had been lost and everything that had, impossibly, been saved. "Is he?" Beatrice started. "He's coming home," Aurora whispered. "That's all I know. That's all I'll ever let myself know." Damiano came home at 4 a.m. She heard the house change, the specific loosening of a fortress when its master returns whole. And she was down the stairs before she'd decided to move, and he was in the foyer, and he was unmarked, untouched, alive. And for a moment, they just looked at each other, across the marble, where a photograph of two roses had once appeared. Then she was against him, and his arms were around her, and neither of them said a word, because the only words that mattered had already been said 3 nights ago, in the dark. "Come back to me." He had. That was the whole of it. That was everything. "It's finished," he said finally, against her hair. "All of it. The war your grandfather started. 50 years. It ended tonight, and the boys are safe, and no one will ever use them against me again." He pulled back to look at her, and there was something in his face she'd never seen, an exhaustion that went to the bone, but under it something clean, something that had put down a weight it had carried its whole life. "I don't want to tell you more than that. You asked me not to. I don't want to know more than that." "Then that's all there is." He touched her face. "Except this. Your father's men, the ones loyal enough to be a threat, they've made their choices tonight. Some are dead. Most aren't. Most were only ever loyal to power, and the power moved, and they moved with it. The Vitali family isn't a threat to those boys anymore. It isn't a threat to anyone. It's finished, the way a candle finishes." His thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. "You're free, Aurora. For the first time in your life, no one owns you. Not your father, not me, no one. You could take the boys and walk out that door tonight, and I would let you, because I finally understand that the only way to keep something is to stop needing to own it." She looked at this man, this cold, terrible, obsessed, transformed man, offering her, of all things, a door. After spending 2 weeks nailing every door shut, offering her the one thing he'd sworn he never would, the freedom to leave. And she understood that it was the truest thing he'd ever given her. That a man who'd bought a nightclub to sit in her ghost, who'd counted their children breathing at 3 a.m., who'd ended a 50-year war to protect 2 boys he'd known for a fortnight, that this man, handing her an open door, was the whole of his love distilled into a single act. "I don't want the door," she said. "Aurora, I spent 6 years running through open doors," she said. I climbed out your window. I climbed out my father's house. I've spent my whole life leaving. I'm not leaving. I'm choosing. There's a difference. And it took me 29 years and 2 children and a war to learn it.
She took his face in both hands. I choose this. I choose you. I choose the loud house full of children and the men with silly names the boys made up and the co-mother in the guest house and all of it. All of it. This whole impossible, dangerous, beautiful thing we made out of 2 families that only knew how to bleed. Her voice broke. You asked me once to stop running long enough to let you be their father. I'm asking you now to let me stop running for good. No window, no door, just us. Damiano Rossi, who had not wept at his own mother's deathbed, wept then, silently, in a marble foyer at 4 in the morning, and gathered the woman he'd loved for 6 years into his arms, and held her, while upstairs 2 identical boys slept the deep, clean sleep of children who did not yet know, and might never fully know, how close they'd come to being a line in an old man's ledger. No window, he agreed, rough. No door. Just us. And for the first time since he was a boy splitting a stolen loaf in an alley, Damiano Rossi felt something he had no name for, because he'd never had cause to name it before. He felt safe. 1 year later. The house by the sea was not a fortress, though it was safe. That was the distinction Aurora had insisted on, and Damiano, who was learning, slowly, clumsily, to give her the things she asked for, instead of the things he thought would protect her, had built it to her specification. Walls low enough to see over, gardens open to the wind, a gate that was usually, scandalously, unlocked, because the war was over and the men who'd sold their loyalty to power had found new power to sell it to, and no one, any more, was doing the terrible arithmetic of 2 identical boys. They were 7 now, Matteo and Leo, still refusing, mostly, to be parted, still finishing each other's sentences in the eerie way of twins who'd found each other late and were making up for lost time with a ferocity that frightened their teachers. They knew now, Damiano and Aurora and Beatrice had told them together, gently, in the careful way you tell children an enormous true thing, that they were brothers, that they'd been born together and grown apart and found their way back, that they had a mother who bore them, and a mother who raised one of them, and a father who'd searched the whole world and finally found them both. So we have 2 mammas, Leo had said, working it out, and 1 papa, and we're twins, and we go to the same school, and we live near the sea. He'd nodded, satisfied. That's a good deal. It's the best deal, Matteo had agreed loyally, and that had been that. Children accept miracles. It's adults who need explanations. Beatrice lived 10 minutes down the coast, close enough that Leo split his weeks and his heart between 2 houses, without ever feeling he'd lost anything, because he hadn't. The 2 mothers had done the impossible thing, the thing no court could have engineered and no lawyer could have drafted. They'd loved the same child without either of them losing him, and in the process, they'd become something the world doesn't have a word for. Closer than friends, bound by a boy. A strange, fierce sisterhood, forged in the one crucible hot enough to fuse it. Aurora married Damiano in the spring, in the garden by the sea, in a dress that was not silk and not diamonds.
in front of no families at all, because they'd made a new family, and it had exactly the people in it that they'd chosen, and not one person more. The boys carried the rings, one each, and dropped one in the grass, and the entire wedding stopped for 4 minutes while everyone searched for it, and it was, Aurora would say for the rest of her life, the most perfect wedding that had ever happened, precisely because it refused to go smoothly, precisely because it was loud and imperfect and real. She sang that night. For the first time in 7 years, she sang. Not for tips in a piano bar, not for sold-out rooms full of dangerous men, but for the small, strange, perfect gathering of people who were hers.
Damiano stood at the back, in the dark at the edge of the garden lights, the way he'd once stood at the back of the Veluto haunting his own life. Except now he wasn't a ghost. Now he was a man, watching his wife sing to their sons, and the expression on his face was one that his oldest enemies would not have recognized, because none of them had ever lived long enough to see Damiano Rossi look simply happy. Later, when the boys were finally asleep, in separate beds now, a recent hard-won development, though the beds were pushed together and would be for years, Aurora found her husband on the terrace, looking out at the black water. "You're doing the counting thing," she said, coming up beside him. "I can always tell. You go somewhere. Old habit." He drew her in against his side. "I stood in their doorway just now. 2 of them, breathing." He was quiet a moment. "For 6 years I thought I had nothing to lose, and I built a whole life on that emptiness. And I told myself it was strength. And now I have everything to lose, and I've never been weaker, and I've never been—" He stopped, hunting for it. "There's no word. I've looked. There isn't one." "There is," Aurora said softly. "You just never had cause to use it." She'd told him once that everything about them was both beautiful and grotesque, salvation and ruin, love and blood. And it was. They were 2 people the world had built to destroy each other, who'd made 2 children out of a single night of gravity, and who'd walked through a war and a betrayal and a grave with her name on it to arrive, impossibly, here, at a low wall by the sea with an unlocked gate and 2 boys breathing in the dark. She thought sometimes of the choice she'd made in a hospital bathroom 7 years ago. The impossible arithmetic. 2 children, 1 war, no way to keep both hidden. She'd chosen to split them to save them, and it had been the worst thing she'd ever done, and the reason they'd both survived. And it had led, through every dark turning, to this. Not to the loss she'd braced for her whole life, but to a garden by the sea where 2 drops of the same blood ran and played and finished each other's sentences and would never, now, be parted again. "Do you ever regret it?" Damiano asked, reading her the way he always could. "The choice you made, giving one of them away?" Aurora watched the sea a long moment. "I regret that the world was the kind of world that made it the only choice," she said finally. "But the choice itself. It brought them here. It brought us here. Every wrong turn led to this exact terrace, this exact night, these exact 2 boys asleep with their beds pushed together." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "So no, I don't regret it. I mourn the version of us that never had to make it. And then I come out to this terrace, and I hear 2 of them breathing, and I stop mourning. Because we won, Damiano.
Against everything. Against 3 generations and a war and both our fathers and our own worst selves. We won. He turned and kissed her, slow, under the dark and open sky, with no window to climb out of, and no door to run through, and no more running left in either of them at all. 2 drops of blood, 2 boys. 1 family, stolen back from the dark, breathing in the dark, safe. It was, as Matteo had said, the best deal. And they never, ever let it go.